Hey Rockies fans, I'm Matt Gross, aka the Rhode Island Rocky fan, and welcome to another episode of Purple Row Video, where today I want to expand a little bit on Brian's rock pile from yesterday, where we talked a little bit about the Rockies rotation potentially returning to normalcy last year, and then possibly into relevancy, and then hopefully into domination in the future if we really get where we want to go. But what I wanted to focus on specifically here is the Rockies rotation in the last 4 or 5 seasons, the journey it's kind of taken, and what is going on beyond the fifth starter. And what I'm defining here as the fifth starter is essentially the top 5 of the guys who make the most starts, and then everybody else. So that may or may not be the 5 people who started the season in the rotation, but it's just easier to look at the 5 guys who started the most games. And then in the other category, who was starting games because either A, those top 5 players were injured, or B, in 2012's case largely, the players were just so bad in those top 5 that the team needed to just put somebody else on the mound because the performance was just too ugly. And what do you really see in this table I've made below is that it really highlights, well, how much the rotation blew up in 2011. It blew up with the Ubaldo Jimenez saga. It blew up when Jorge De La Rosa needed Tommy John surgery. That also wrecked in 2012 with the recovery. It blew up when Yoeli Chacin started having trouble throwing strikes. That may or may not have led to his injury that ruined his 2012. And it, of course, blew up when Juan Nicasio was almost killed on the mound by the line drive in August of 2011. So just brutal year that not only ruined that season, but really kind of derailed the Rockies for 2 to 2.5 seasons because their lack of pitching depth was exposed. Not much of that's their fault because they didn't have enough pitching talent coming out of their own pipeline for a team that needs to have talent coming out of their farm system to recover from this sort of blow up. But even so, even if they did an adequate job of it, they were going to be impacted by how much the rotation blew up in 2011. But then, 2012 just became the perfect storm where everything that could have possibly go wrong went wrong because of the injuries, because of their own lack of depth, and just a wild combination of things that just really kind of threw this thing off track. But what you notice in these charts, in the table below, is just how bad some of this pitching has been beyond the fifth starter. And when you look at this, you say, well, no wonder they've lost so many games the last 3 years, because it is a joke who they've sent out there in the mound. You just look at the names in the table. I'm not going to go over them one by one. I'm not going to rehash the disasters that were. But it really is amazing how bad some of these pitchers are the Rockies have sent to the mound in the last 3 years. And I kind of trace it all back to the 2011 blow-up, because going into that season, it really looked like the Rockies were going to be set with Ubaldo Jimenez, who we thought was on his way to being a dominant pitcher over a long period of time. Obviously, that ended in 2010. Jorge De La Rosa, who has been good before and after the Tommy John surgery, just to kind of wreck those 2 seasons, obviously, Yoeli Chacin. It looked at the Rockies that had dominant top 3, and when that came unraveled, it really came unraveled, and was just a mess. But, what you start to see last year is, a building back, so to speak, a comeback trail at the top of the Rockies rotation, and you really saw that with Chacin, De La Rosa, and then Chatwood, who kind of joined that group of relevancy, and then it dropped off beyond that. You had Juan Nicasio, who was decent, and then just a pile of junk behind that. But what do you notice from last season is that in the 81 starts made by Jorge De La Rosa, Yoeli Chacin, and Tyler Chatwood, the Rockies went 49-32. They were very respectable. 17 games north of 500. But the problem is that those 3 guys only made half the starts, 81 starts. The Rockies obviously were horrible when they were not in the mound, particularly if you had Juan Nicasio to the list of the other three. Well, he wasn't as dominant as the other three, but the big drop-off came up behind Juan Nicasio. And that's why I think Brett Anderson is so important, and that's where, I think he's vital to the Rockies rotation taking that next step this season. Because if you look at the rotation, you say, all right, you got Yoli Chassin. You feel like the Rockies are going to be able to win the majority of games he starts. In other words, if he starts 30, 32 games, whatever he does, you feel like the Rockies are going to be able to win at least 51% of the games he starts. Same thing with Jorge De La Rosa. Same thing with Tyler Chatwood. Even if you include 2012, his time in a Rockies uniform, the Rockies have a winning record in the game he starts. And I understand, win-loss record, whatever you want to put on pitchers. It does mean something if the team is winning most of the games that he starts. It does bode well. And then Brett Anderson, who actually has a losing record. The A's had a losing record in games he started, but that is largely due to the fact that in 2010, when he made 19 starts and had a 2.80 ERA, somehow the A's lost more than they won because they didn't score any runs for him. But you feel like the Rockies should, if Brett Anderson is healthy, big if, they should be able to post a winning record when he's in the mound as well. So all of a sudden now you got four guys there who you feel like are going to give the Rockies a good chance to win every single time they go out there. And so now the question becomes, well, how many starts are they going to make? And that is really going to become the biggest question that surrounds, or one of the biggest questions that surrounds the 2014 Rockies, because you have four guys who you feel pretty good about, but you also have four guys who all have had trouble staying on the field to varying degrees. They've all either spent time on the disabled list or have missed time for some weird reason last year, like Jorge De La Rosa last year, shut down in September. And he's had multiple injury problems from Tommy John surgery to finger tendons to the groin injury that kept him out of the 09 NLDS. Yoli Chassin spent a brief time on the DL early in the season last year, missed much of 2012. Tyler Chatwood still has not proven he can pitch a whole season, and Brett Anderson has had his share of issues. So you got four guys who have just had so many problems staying on the field. You sort of wonder if they're going to be, how much they're going to be able to, how many starts they're going to be able to get out of them. But it really becomes a key question, because last year you saw that the top three, before the Rockies had Brett Anderson, they only made up 81 starts. They should make up, 95 or something in that neighborhood. They were limited to 81 because of, for various reasons. You add Brett Anderson to that mix, and it really just becomes a game of how much can these four stay on the field. Because if these four guys can start 120 starts, which would be in the high end, if they all stayed healthy, they should start about 128 games. If they each start 32, that's how many. If each of those guys start 32 games, you'd equal 128. But you say, maybe three of them stay healthy and one of them goes on the disabled list for a couple of months, but overall still a pretty good season. You get 120 starts out of those four guys. All of a sudden now, you talk about last year where Chassin, Chatwood, and De La Rosa were able to net you 17 games north of 500 between the three of them. You should figure that you add Anderson to that mix, and they should be able to be at least 17 games over 500 between the four of them. And yes, I do expect some regression from Jorge De La Rosa and Chassin and Chatwood as a group. But they don't have to win at the same clip, at a .605 winning percentage, which is what the team had when those three were on the mound last year. They only have to win maybe at a .560, .570 winning percentage to get to 17, 18, 19, 20 games over 500 when those four are on the mound, if they're making 110, 120 starts. So you don't have to win as much when you're getting more starts out of those guys. You have to win at the same clip, in other words. So having them important works in both directions. It works, one, because they don't have to win as much to get you 18, 20 games over 500, which is what you obviously need if you're going to snip 90 wins and have a chance at a playoff spot. But also, the more games those four start, as you start getting up into 110, 120 starts from those guys, you start to significantly cut down the number of starts that's going to be needed by guys beyond the fifth starter. And if you look at the table below, you can see that you want to minimize the number of starts made by the guys below the fifth starter. Now, 2014 may be a special case because some of those starts made by guys beyond the fifth starter could be from John Gray and Eddie Butler. So if those guys pitch really, really well and come bursting onto the scene, that might be a game changer. Then you might have a 2007 scenario in place where you have young flamethrowers coming up. That's a different scenario. But it's vital that Chacin, De La Rosa, Chetwood, and Anderson stay healthy for three reasons. One, because obviously they're good pitchers when healthy, and they're going to help the Rockies win games. Two, they cut down the number of starts made by the terrible pitchers. And if you look at who the Rockies have beyond those four, in Juan Nicasio and Jordan Lyles and Christian Friedrich and maybe Franklin Morales, I know a lot of people don't want to hear that. But if you start limiting those four to 30 or 35 remaining games, all of a sudden you say, okay, I can live with the best one of those four starting games. Whoever of those four win the battle, you can live with the best one of those four being the number 5 starter. Maybe the number 4 starter if one of the other guys has to spend, a couple weeks on the deal. But it's much more manageable when you have them being the number 5 starter instead of having 2 or 3 of these guys representing the 4 starter, the 5 starter, and sometimes the 3 starter when the other guys are on the DL. So it starts mounting up fast. It works out you from both directions. One, from how good those top 4 do, and then 2, how much bad is eking in the rotation. And the third reason why it's important, why you want those guys being healthy, is because if they're healthy, they're probably going to be pitching well, and if they're pitching well, then it allows you to force Gray and Butler to kick down the major league door themselves instead of sitting there in August when you're 6 games out of a playoff. But maybe we can sneak in if we rush them, and then you knock them off their development trail, and then possibly ruin them for another season where they have to adjust to a major league culture that they might not necessarily be ready for. You force them to kick the door down instead of what the Rockies have had to do in the past because of 2011, where everything fell apart and they didn't have enough in their pipeline enough in their pitching pipeline to support what happened in 2011. They didn't really want to start Drew Pomeranz in all those games, but they didn't really have anybody else, so they just had to throw him out there. You want to, at all costs, avoid that situation with Gray and Butler. And if those top 4 stay healthy, that's a major F, because I don't necessarily see that happening because of the trouble those guys have had staying on the field. But if they do stay healthy, it is a total game changer because of what I just outlined. All of it flows. How well they pitch, how much you crush the Jordan Lyles, Juan Nicasio, Christian Friedrich, Franklin Morales starters from amassing starts, unless they really go and prove they deserve it. They have to show that they are capable of being in the rotation, or else they're not going to be there because there's just not enough spots for a job. And then also what it allows you to do with Gray and Butler in terms of their development. It is a total game changer. And as you can see from this chart below, 2009 Rockies only had 7 starts made by guys who were not in those top 5. I don't expect anything like that in 2014, but it just shows you how much of an advantage it is when you can have a competent core in your rotation. The Rockies have that if it can stay healthy. We'll see how it works.